His face was a mask of pure, self-satisfied arrogance, the kind he always wore when he thought he had won. He leaned back in the plush leather chair of his lawyer's office, a conference room so sterile and gray it seemed to suck the very color out of the world. It perfectly matched his soul. My father, Richard, looked at me across the vast mahogany table, his eyes glinting with triumph. Beside him, my sister Amelia, the golden child, smirked. She was practically vibrating with vicarious victory. "So, as you can see," my father said, his voice dripping with condescending reasonableness, aimed at the mediator at the head of the table. "This is all quite straightforward, an itemized accounting of expenses incurred, $177,452.38. He slid the document across the table. It stopped near my hands, which were resting quite calmly in my lap. I had seen it before, of course. It had arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope a year prior, a declaration of war disguised as an invoice. At the bottom, in his sharp, aggressive handwriting, was the memo line, "Cost of raising a failure." The mediator, a tired-looking man named Mr. Harris, cleared his throat, looking deeply uncomfortable. He looked at me, his expression a mixture of pity and professional obligation. He expected tears. He expected me to break down, to protest, to beg. My father expected it. My sister was practically salivating for it, but for the first time in a very, very long time, when I looked at my father, I smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was small, quiet, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was the smile of a predator that had finally cornered its prey after a very, very long hunt. And in that moment, I saw the first flicker of confusion in his eyes, the first tiny crack in that mask of supreme confidence. He didn't know it yet. He couldn't possibly comprehend it. But his life, as he knew it, was already over. It had been over for months. He was just the last to find out. But I am getting ahead of myself. To understand the sheer, glorious beauty of that moment, you have to understand the 30 years that came before it. You have to understand the suffocating weight of being Richard's other daughter. I'm sitting here now, in my own home. It's a small house, but it's filled with light and books and the smell of the ocean, which is just a short walk away. On the wall in my study, in a simple black frame, hangs that invoice. It's a trophy, a reminder. Sometimes my partner, Ben, will see me looking at it and he'll wrap his arms around my waist. He doesn't say anything. He just holds me, and I can feel the solid, dependable warmth of him, a feeling I never knew growing up. He knows the story. He's the one who encouraged me to write it all down, to tell it. He says it's not about revenge anymore. It's about release. And maybe he's right. So let me start from the beginning. Let me tell you how my father tried to bill me for my own childhood, and how, in return, I took everything from him. My father was a man who worshipped at the altar of appearances. Our family wasn't just a family, it was a corporation, and he was its chief executive officer. Our home was not a home, it was a showroom designed to project success, wealth, and impeccable taste. My mother, before she passed, was the long-suffering vice president of domestic affairs, her worth measured by the flawlessness of her dinner parties and the social standing of her friends. My sister, Amelia, was the star product. She was beautiful, charismatic, and effortlessly mirrored our father's ambition. She went to the right schools, got the right grades, dated the right boys, and eventually landed a high-powered job in finance that made my father swell with pride. She was his legacy, his proof of concept. And then there was me, Clara. If my family was a corporation, I was the quiet, overlooked IT department, necessary for things to run but never acknowledged, never praised. I was not beautiful like Amelia. I was quiet, observant, and bookish. While Amelia was out charming the world, I was the one making sure the world she and my father inhabited ran smoothly. I was the one who remembered my mother's medication schedule when her illness began to cloud her mind. I was the one who learned how to navigate the labyrinthine back end of my father's business software because he couldn't be bothered. I was the one who balanced the household checkbook, who dealt with the plumber, who made sure the property taxes were paid on time. I did it all without thanks because it was simply expected. It was my function. My father saw my quiet competence not as a strength, but as a lack of ambition. "Well, why are you always fiddling with those boring details, Clara?" he'd ask, not with curiosity, but with disdain. "You should be out there, making a name for yourself. Look at your sister." Ah, yes, look at my sister. That was the refrain of my life. Amelia got a promotion. I got a lecture on my own stagnant career as a freelance book editor, a job my father referred to as my little hobby. Amelia got engaged to a man with a trust fund. I got a grim talk about my dwindling prospects because I was dating a kind, gentle musician my father deemed unsuitable. He didn't see value in kindness or creativity. He saw value in stock portfolios and country club memberships. The musician didn't last, not because of my father's disapproval, but because the constant low-grade stress of being in that family was like a poison that leached into everything. It was hard to cultivate joy in a place where it wasn't a recognized currency. After my mother died, the dynamic solidified. Amelia, living in the city, would swoop in for holidays, bringing expensive gifts and regaling our father with stories of her corporate conquests. I, who had been there through the long, draining years of my mother's illness, stayed in our hometown. I stayed because I thought, foolishly, that he needed me. I helped him manage the estate. I helped him organize my mother's belongings. I cooked his meals, listened to his monologues about the market, and absorbed his endless critiques of my life. I was his support system, his unpaid assistant, his emotional punching bag. And I took it. Why? It's a question I've asked myself 1,000 times. I think deep down I was still that little girl, desperate for a crumb of his approval. I thought if I was dutiful enough, helpful enough, quiet enough, one day he would turn to me and say, "Thank you, Clara. I couldn't have done it without you." What a fool I was. The inciting incident, the moment the scales finally, irrevocably fell from my eyes, wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was the quiet thud of that cream-colored envelope hitting the floor of my entryway. I had just turned 30. It was a milestone my father had marked with a terse phone call. "Well, you're 30, he'd said, as if announcing a terminal diagnosis. "Still single, still with that little hobby of yours. Your mother would be so disappointed." He didn't wish me a happy birthday. A week later, the envelope arrived. I recognized his handwriting instantly on the label, a sharp, angry scrawl. Inside, there was no letter, no card, just the invoice. Page after page of itemized costs dating back to my birth. Hospital delivery fee, $2,500. Diapers, wipes, formula, 1992 to 1994, adjusted for inflation, $7,843.12. Education, St. Anne's Preparatory School, subpar ROI, $92,500. The line about the subpar return on investment felt like a physical blow. He had monetized my entire existence. He had reduced my life to a balance sheet and found it wanting. There were entries for clothes, food, orthodontics, my first car, a 10-year-old sedan he'd made a great show of gifting me. Every memory was tainted, every act of parental care reframed as a transaction. The family vacations weren't for family bonding. They were a travel and leisure expense. He was now charging back to me. And then the final page. The grand total, $177,452.38. And that single gutting line in the memo field. Cost of raising a failure. I sank to the floor, the papers scattered around me. I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the audacity of it, the sheer mind-bending cruelty. It was the cold, hard proof of what I had always suspected but never wanted to believe. I was not his daughter. I was a bad investment. I sat there for what felt like hours, the shock giving way to a pain so profound it was physical. My chest ached. My vision blurred. Then I picked up the phone and called him. My voice was shaking. "I got your, letter," I managed to say. "Ah, the invoice," he said, his tone brisk and businesslike. "Good. I trust it's all clear." "Clear?" I whispered. "Dad, what is this? Is this some kind of joke?" "Clara, I do not joke about finances," he said, the coldness in his voice like a slap. "It's time for you to take some responsibility for your life. You have contributed nothing to this family's legacy. You have coasted, pursuing your little hobbies while your sister builds an empire. You have rejected every opportunity, every piece of advice I've given you." "So you're billing me for my own life?" My voice cracked. "I am billing you for the resources you consumed without providing any return," he corrected. "Consider it a loan, one that is now due. I expect a payment plan within 30 days. We can discuss terms. I'm not an unreasonable man." Unreasonable. The word hung in the air, so absurd, so completely detached from reality that something inside me snapped. The deep, aching grief began to cool. It hardened into something else, something cold, sharp, and heavy. It was rage. A pure, silent, crystalline rage. "Okay," I said, my voice suddenly steady. The change was so abrupt it seemed to surprise him. "Okay?" he repeated. "Okay," I said again. "I understand. I'll need to figure out a plan." "Good," he said, sounding pleased, as if he'd just closed a difficult deal. "That's the first sensible thing you've said in years. Don't be a stranger, Clara. Let me know what you decide." He hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, the silence of my small apartment ringing in my ears. He thought he had won. He thought he had finally broken me. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. He had spent 30 years teaching me that love was conditional, that worth was transactional, that everything came down to a ledger. Fine. It was time to balance the books. For the next few days, I barely moved. I let the grief and the rage wash over me in waves. I grieved for the father I never had. I grieved for the childhood I now saw as a long, drawn-out business arrangement. I let myself feel every ounce of the humiliation. And then I got to work. My father had one critical, fatal flaw: arrogance. He was so blinded by his own perceived brilliance that he could not conceive of anyone, least of all me, ever outsmarting him. He saw me as the quiet, pliable, bookish girl. He had no idea that the same mind that could track the intricate plot of a dense Victorian novel or meticulously edit a complex manuscript could also recognize patterns, follow a paper trail, and hold a grudge with the patience of a saint. And he had forgotten about my greatest inheritance. It wasn't from him. It was from his mother, my grandmother, Eleanor. Grandma Eleanor had been the true founder of the family business. It was her seed money and her business acumen that had started the small manufacturing company my grandfather later took over and my father eventually inherited. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman with a mind like a steel trap, and she had never trusted her son. She saw his greed, his narcissism, his desperate need for applause. She loved me fiercely, and when I was a teenager, she would often pull me aside. "Watch him, Clara," she'd say, her eyes sharp. "Your father sees people as assets or liabilities. Make sure you always know which one you are to him, and never, ever let him control your money." When she passed away, she left Amelia a significant but straightforward sum of money. To me, she left her old roll-top desk and a much smaller cash inheritance. My father had been smug about it, seeing it as proof that even his own mother recognized Amelia's superior potential. He never bothered to look inside the desk. I had. In a hidden compartment locked with a key she had given me years before was my true inheritance. First, there was a letter. It explained that she had established a trust in my name, managed by her own fiercely loyal lawyer, a man named Arthur Vance. The trust was substantial, far more than Amelia had received. It was to remain a secret until I was 30, or until I had what she called a dire need. She wrote, "Your father will try to control you with money, Clara. This is your freedom. Don't show your cards until you have a winning hand." I had turned 30 just a week before the invoice arrived. It seemed my grandmother had been a prophet, but the trust was only half of it. The other half was far more valuable. Beneath the letter were 4 thick, leather-bound ledgers, my grandmother's private business journals. For years, she had meticulously documented the company's finances, its deals, its partners, and she had continued to watch, even after she was pushed out of the business by her own son. The ledgers detailed with damning precision how my father, upon inheriting the company, had systematically and fraudulently bought out 2 of his father's original partners for a fraction of what their shares were worth. He had used shell corporations and falsified profit reports. He had, in short, built his empire on a foundation of theft. I had known about the ledgers for years. I had read them once out of curiosity, but their full implication hadn't sunk in. They were just stories from a past I didn't fully understand. But now, holding my father's invoice in one hand, I opened the first ledger, and I realized my grandmother had given me a nuke. My first instinct was to call him, to scream, to tell him I knew what he had done. But my grandmother's words echoed in my head. "Don't show your cards until you have a winning hand." A confrontation would do nothing. He would deny it. He would destroy any modern records that could corroborate the old journals. He would paint me as a bitter, hysterical woman, fabricating lies for money, number. He had chosen the weapon, the ledger, the balance sheet. I would defeat him on his own terms, but it wouldn't be a quick victory. It would be a slow, methodical, soul-crushing siege. I would not just prove him wrong. I would dismantle his entire reality. I would take his company, his reputation, his legacy, and I would do it while smiling and playing the part of the dutiful, broken daughter. The first call I made was to Arthur Vance, my grandmother's lawyer. He was semi-retired, a sharp old man who spoke in gruff, precise sentences. I had met him a few times as a child. He had always looked at my father with a thinly veiled contempt. "Mr. Vance," I said, when his secretary put me through, "this is Clara Croft, Eleanor's granddaughter." "Clara," he said, his voice warming instantly. "I was wondering when you'd call. Happy 30th. Your grandmother would be very proud of the woman you've become." Tears pricked my eyes. It was the first kind thing anyone had said to me in a week. "I think I have a dire need," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I told him everything, about the invoice, about the phone call, about the ledgers. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then he let out a low whistle. "The man is a work of art," he said, with no small amount of admiration for the sheer villainy. Billing his own daughter. Eleanor was right about him from day one. "I have the ledgers," I said. Can we use them?" "Use them." He chuckled a dry, rustling sound. "My dear girl, those ledgers are the Dead Sea Scrolls of your father's financial sins. They establish a pattern of behavior. With them, we can subpoena his current books. We can look for the same patterns. And knowing Richard, I guarantee we'll find them. He's not creative enough to invent new ways to be a crook." And so, the plan was born. Arthur agreed to represent me. He activated my trust, giving me access to the funds I would need for the coming war. He hired a team of forensic accountants, the best in the business. My job was simple, yet excruciatingly difficult. I had to play the victim. I had to call my father and begin the charade of negotiating a payment plan for his monstrous bill. I had to endure his lectures, his condescension, his smug satisfaction. I had to become the failure he believed me to be. Every phone call was an exercise in supreme self-control. "Dad, it's me," I'd say, injecting a tremor into my voice. "I've been looking at my finances. I can't afford much right now." "Responsibility is often inconvenient, Clara," he'd say, his voice smooth as silk. "Perhaps you should sell that car I bought you, or get a second job. A little hard work might do you some good." I would bite the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, and I would whisper, "Okay, I'll look into it." Meanwhile, Arthur and his team were digging, and they were finding gold. My quiet, unacknowledged years of helping with my father's business paid off in ways I could never have imagined. I knew the software he used. I knew his filing systems. I knew the names of his accountants and bookkeepers. I directed Arthur's team to the dark, dusty corners of the company's servers, to the accounts he thought no one ever looked at. And the patterns my grandmother had documented 30 years ago were there, clear as day. Undeclared income being funneled into offshore accounts, inflated expense reports, personal luxuries, cars, vacations, Amelia's apartment in the city, written off as business costs. It was a sprawling, arrogant, and incredibly sloppy tapestry of fraud. He had been cheating on his taxes, cheating his remaining partners, and embezzling from his own company for decades. Each new discovery felt like a shot of adrenaline. We were building a fortress of evidence, brick by painstaking brick. While my father saw me as a whimpering child, I was secretly directing an army that was preparing to level his kingdom. The hardest part was dealing with Amelia. She, of course, was my father's staunchest supporter. She saw the invoice not as an act of cruelty, but as a necessary, if harsh, lesson. She would call me, her voice oozing with fake sympathy. "Clara, I heard about Dad's bill," she'd say. "I'm so sorry you put him in a position where he felt he had to do that." Put him in a position. The sheer audacity of it left me speechless. "He just wants what's best for you," she'd continue, a self-help guru dispensing poison. "He wants you to have ambition, like me. My career is soaring right now. We just landed the Henderson account. It's huge." Every conversation was a performance. She performed the role of the concerned, successful sister. I performed the role of the pathetic, struggling sibling. "That's great, Amelia," I'd say, my voice flat. "I'm happy for you." "Are you?" she'd press. "You don't sound happy. You sound jealous. You know, that's your problem, Clara. You're always so negative. You have to manifest success." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that I was currently manifesting the complete and utter implosion of her entire world. Instead, I'd sigh and say, "Maybe you're right." Their arrogance was my greatest shield. They were so convinced of my weakness that they never looked closely. They never questioned my act. They told themselves a story about me, the jealous, incompetent failure, and they believed it with all their hearts. This went on for nearly a year of biting my tongue, a year of faking tears, a year of listening to my father and sister gloat while I secretly compiled the evidence that would destroy them. They thought they were grinding me down, but they weren't. They were sharpening me. The final act began with a phone call from my father. His voice was firm, impatient. "Clara, this has gone on long enough," he said. "Your token payments of $100 a month are an insult. We need to formalize this. I've scheduled a meeting with a professional mediator. My lawyer will be there. I suggest you find some kind of representation, though I doubt you can afford anyone competent." This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. He wanted a public stage for my final humiliation. He was handing me the microphone and the spotlight. "Okay, Dad," I said, my voice a perfect imitation of defeated resignation. "Whatever you think is best." "It is what's best," he snapped. "Tuesday, 10 o'clock, my lawyer's office. Don't be late." I hung up the phone and immediately called Arthur. "He's called the meeting," I said. I could hear the smile in Arthur's voice. "Excellent," he said. "The trap is set, and the quarry is walking right into it. I'll have the presentation binders ready. How are you feeling?" "Ready," I said. And for the first time in my life, it was the absolute truth. I spent the weekend in quiet preparation. I didn't frantically review the evidence. Arthur and his team had handled that. They had built a case so airtight it was a work of art. My preparation was mental. I reread my grandmother's letter. I looked at old photographs of my mother, feeling a pang of sorrow that she had endured this man for so long. I thought about every slight, every insult, every moment of casual cruelty. I wasn't just doing this for me. I was doing it for my grandmother, who had been cheated. I was doing it for my mother, who had been diminished. I was doing it for the little girl who just wanted her father to be proud of her. By the time Tuesday morning arrived, I was a pillar of calm. I chose my outfit carefully, a simple dark gray dress, understated, professional, the kind of thing a failure would wear to a funeral, her own. When I walked into the conference room, they were already there, my father looking powerful and important in his expensive suit, Amelia beside him, looking chic and bored, as if she had deigned to take time out of her busy schedule for this pathetic family drama. My father's lawyer, a slick man with a predatory smile, and Mr. Harris, the mediator, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Arthur Vance was already seated on the opposite side of the table. He gave me a small, encouraging nod as I sat beside him. My father didn't even greet me. He launched right in, addressing the mediator. "As you can see, we're all here. Let's get this over with." He proceeded to lay out his case, painting a picture of me as an ungrateful, lazy leech who had refused to take responsibility for her life. He talked about his generosity, his patience, his endless support. Amelia nodded along, occasionally murmuring, "It's true, he's been so patient." It was a masterful performance of self-delusion. Then he pushed the invoice across the table again. $177,452.38, he repeated, savoring the number. "We are here to establish a legally binding repayment plan. I am prepared to be generous with the interest rate." Mr. Harris, the mediator, looked at me with those pitying eyes. "Miss Croft," he said gently, "do you have a response?" This was my cue, but I didn't speak. I simply looked at Arthur. Arthur cleared his throat, a sound that cut through the smug silence of the room. "My client has no response to that particular document," he said, his voice calm and authoritative, "because it is irrelevant. We are not here today to discuss Miss Croft's alleged debt to her father." My father frowned. "Then what are we here for?" "We are here," Arthur said, leaning forward slightly, "to discuss your debt, to my client, to your former business partners, and to the Internal Revenue Service." He placed a thick blue binder on the table with a heavy thud. "What is this?" my father demanded, his voice losing some of its smoothness. "This," Arthur said, tapping the binder, "is a copy of your mother's private business ledgers from 1985 to 1995. I believe you'll recognize them. They detail in excruciating clarity the fraudulent means by which you acquired a controlling interest in Croft Manufacturing." The color began to drain from my father's face. Amelia's smirk faltered. "This is absurd," my father blustered. "My mother was a senile old woman. Those are meaningless scribbles." "Are they?" Arthur asked pleasantly. He placed a second red binder next to the first. "Because our forensic accounting team found these meaningless scribbles to be a remarkably accurate roadmap. This second binder contains our analysis of Croft Manufacturing's financials for the last 10 years. And what we found is that the same patterns of fraud your mother documented 30 years ago are still your go-to business model." He opened the red binder. Shell corporations, falsified invoices, systematic embezzlement disguised as executive bonuses and expenses. For example, the down payment on your daughter Amelia's city apartment. A business expense, you claimed, for client relations. Amelia went white as a ghost. "This is slander," she gasped. "It's wire fraud," Arthur corrected her gently, "and tax evasion. The IRS is particularly sensitive about that sort of thing." My father was on his feet now, his face turning a mottled shade of red. "This is a shakedown. You have no proof." Arthur smiled, a thin, cold smile that did not reach his eyes. "Richard, please," he said, his voice dropping to an almost conversational tone. Don't insult my intelligence, or Clara's. He placed a third binder on the table. Green. This one contains copies of emails, bank statements, and recorded phone conversations. Your conversations, Richard, bragging to your broker about your creative accounting, instructing your bookkeeper to make the numbers work. It seems your arrogance extends to a complete disregard for digital evidence. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the suddenly frigid room. My father stared at the 3 binders, blue, red, and green, the primary colors of his destruction. He looked at me then, truly looked at me for the first time that day. The confusion in his eyes had been replaced by dawning, horrified comprehension. He was looking at me, but he was seeing my grandmother. He was seeing the quiet, meticulous patience that he had always mistaken for weakness. You, he whispered. The word choked with disbelief. You did this. No, I said, finally speaking. My voice was quiet, but it carried across the table like a shard of ice. You did this. I just took notes. Arthur delivered the final blow. A complete copy of these files was delivered to the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS in the District Attorney's Office yesterday morning, he stated calmly. They are currently securing a warrant to freeze all your assets, personal and corporate. I expect that warrant will be executed within the hour. He looked at my father's lawyer, who looked like he had been struck by lightning. I'd advise you to start thinking about a plea bargain, Arthur said. The evidence is overwhelming. He then turned his attention back to my father. My client is also filing a civil suit. We will be seeking to dissolve the current corporation and reclaim her rightful inheritance, based on the shares you stole from her grandmother's side of the family, adjusted for 30 years of growth. We will also be seeking punitive damages for emotional distress, defamation, and harassment. He paused and then gestured to the invoice still sitting in the middle of the table. As for this, we consider it paid in full. The silence that followed was absolute. My father sank back into his chair, his face a grotesque mask of rage and despair. He looked like a king who had just watched his entire kingdom burn to the ground. Amelia was openly crying, silent tears tracking down her perfectly made-up face. Her world of privilege and success had just evaporated. And me, I felt nothing but a profound, quiet calm. The rage was gone. The pain was gone. All that was left was a vast, empty peace. I stood up, and for the first time in my life, I felt taller than him. I reached across the table and picked up his invoice. I folded it neatly and put it in my purse, a souvenir. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I pulled a single sheet of paper from my bag and slid it across the table to where my father sat, broken. It was an invoice of my own. It had only one line item. For services rendered, forensic accounting, business consulting, and emotional labor. In the space for the total, I had simply written, "We're even." Then I turned, and without a backward glance, I walked out of that gray, sterile room and into the rest of my life. The collapse was swift and total. Just as Arthur predicted, my father's assets were frozen by lunchtime. The news of the investigation hit the local business journal by the end of the day. Croft Manufacturing CEO under investigation for decades of fraud. The story was merciless, detailing the allegations of tax evasion and embezzlement. His name, the name he had spent his entire life trying to build into a monument of success, became synonymous with disgrace. His business partners, the ones he hadn't already cheated, abandoned him immediately. His friends, the ones who had flocked to his dinner parties and golfed with him at the country club, suddenly stopped returning his calls. In his world, the stench of failure was more offensive than the stench of criminality, and he was now covered in both. The civil suit was a formality. Faced with the mountain of evidence, my father's lawyers had no choice but to settle. The company was dissolved. What little was left after the government took its massive share in back taxes and penalties was carved up. The descendants of the partners he had defrauded decades ago received a massive, life-changing settlement, and I received my grandmother's legacy. It was a substantial fortune, enough to ensure I would never have to worry about money again. But it was never about the money. It was about the justice. My father lost everything: the company, the house, which had to be sold to cover his mounting legal fees, his reputation, his freedom. Faced with a mountain of evidence and the prospect of a long prison sentence, he took a plea bargain. He was sentenced to 5 years in a minimum security federal prison. A man who valued appearances above all else was now a number in a beige jumpsuit. Amelia's downfall was less dramatic, but in some ways more complete. Her wealthy fiancé, whose family valued their pristine reputation even more than their money, broke off the engagement. He sent her a text message. Her high-flying career in finance came to a screeching halt. The scandal made her toxic. She was quietly let go from her firm. The last I heard, she was living in a small, rented apartment, working a mid-level marketing job, and drowning in the debt she had accumulated while living her high-flying life. She had to sell her designer bags and her expensive car. She had to learn to live like a normal person. For her, it was a fate worse than death. About a month after the settlement, a few weeks before my father was due to report to prison, I got one last phone call. It was him. His voice was different. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a whining, wheedling tone I had never heard from him before. "Clara," he said, I need your help." I said nothing. "They've taken everything," he lamented. "Everything I built. Your sister is a wreck. How could you do this to your own family?" Not once did he apologize. Not once did he take responsibility. Even in his ruin, he was the victim. I was the villain who had wronged him. "You have to help me," he begged. "You have all that money now, my money. You have to give it back. We're family." Family. He dared to use that word to me, after everything. I listened to him go on for another minute, a pathetic litany of complaints and accusations. Then I finally spoke. "I have a question for you," I said, my voice perfectly calm. He stopped, momentarily hopeful. "Anything, Clara." "That invoice you sent me," I said, "the one for $177,000. Did you charge me for the phone I'm holding right now? Or was that included under the general utilities heading?" There was a stunned silence. He didn't understand. He couldn't comprehend that I wasn't angry or gloating or sad. I was simply done. He was a line item on a spreadsheet that no longer concerned me. "What? What does that have to do with anything?" he stammered. "Goodbye, Richard," I said, using his first name for the first and last time in my life. Then I hung up. I blocked his number. I blocked Amelia's number. I cut the final toxic cord, and I was free. Which brings me back to here, to my sunlit study with the sound of the waves in the distance. The invoice hangs on my wall, not as a reminder of the pain, but as a testament to my strength. It's the receipt for the purchase of my own soul. Ben walks in, carrying 2 mugs of tea. He's a landscape architect, a man who creates beauty and life from dirt. He has kind eyes and calloused hands. He saw me when I was still in the middle of the wreckage, introduced by a mutual friend, and he wasn't scared away by the story. He was just there. Supportive. Solid. He sets a mug down on my desk and wraps his arms around my shoulders from behind, resting his chin on my head. "Staring at the dragon's tooth again?" he asks gently. That's what he calls the invoice. "Just remembering," I say, leaning back against him. "Good memories or bad?" "Both," I say. "And neither. It just is." He understands. He doesn't tell me to take it down. He doesn't tell me to forget. He knows it's a part of my story, the foundation upon which I built this new, better life. My grandmother Eleanor had one last piece of advice in her letter, a line I have come to understand completely. "Some people," she wrote, "will only understand the language of consequences. Do not be afraid to speak it fluently." My father thought he was billing me for being a failure. What he was really doing was giving me a lesson in his native tongue. It was a language of numbers, of profit and loss, of assets and liabilities. He taught me the language, and then he was shocked when I used it to write his ending. He never understood that my quietness was not weakness. It was observation. My patience was not passivity. It was strategy. And my love, which he had so casually commodified, could, when betrayed, transform into a resolve as cold and as hard as the numbers on his balance sheet. He raised a failure, he said. He was wrong. He raised a survivor. He raised the woman who would finally make him pay his debts. And as I take a sip of my tea, feeling the warmth of Ben's arms around me, listening to the peaceful rhythm of the ocean, I can honestly say it was the best investment I ever made. The bill is paid. I am finally gloriously even, and the peace that comes with that knowledge is worth more than any number he could ever have written down. It's priceless.